Like, who can watch Citizen Kane? It's so boring. Why is it the best movie ever made? If you're not paying attention, I can see why you would think the movie was boring. Because there is so much nuance in the film, but if you really want to understand the film, you need to watch it twice. I want to start from the very beginning and then explain why Rosebud possibly is not anything of what people think it is. This is a complicated movie. It moves really quickly in some places, really slowly in others. The most important thing, there's two most important things. One is the mistaken meaning of Rosebud, and two is the very question at the center of this film. And the question at the center of this film is, how do you know who a man is? And you can take that philosophically, even to women, and say to yourself, how do I know who I really am? Am I the sum total of my experiences? How do we know who we are? And that's what Citizen Kane is about. And if you don't get that, then yeah, the movie's boring. But if you get that, it's not, because what's interesting, we never ever talk directly to Charles Foster Kane, played by Orson Welles. Never. Every single thing we hear about his life is through somebody who knew him. Do you know more about yourself than the combined people in your life who know you? Or do they know more about you? So we have a film where we never ever meet the main character, Charles Foster Kane, but every single interview by an unnamed reporter, you never see his face, who's going around trying to find out what Rosebud means, his final word, and who this man was by talking to people he knew. So as he goes around talking to people he knew, we get totally different stories of who this man was depending on who you're talking to. All we get to see are interviews with people who knew him, and then flashbacks that show kind of in real time or present time the story that that person being interviewed, like his wife, not his wife because she dies, but like Susan Alexander, his mistress, we're just getting her perspective. So if you add up all the perspectives you get from each person that's interviewed, what does that tell us about who Charles Foster Kane was? And how do we know we're right? So I want to dispel a myth, because if you believe that Rosebud is the SLED, you are so far off trying to figure out who Charles Foster Kane was, then you know. One of the things is, and this goes back to talking about Hitchcock, is that Hitchcock almost always had what he called the MacGuffin. And the MacGuffin is the thing that everyone's trying to find that creates the conflict in the narrative. Like in North by Northwest, everyone's trying to find the microfilm. But once you find the microfilm, you never find out what's on it. It's not important. We only care if Cary Grant, gets together with Eva Marie Saint. Like, we don't care about the MacGuffin. And that is a joke on us from the director, because the director, you usually think when you watch a movie that every single thing has meaning and it's important in a way that you understand. But that's not true. So if we really think about the opening scene, what do you see in the mise-en-scène, in the frame? What do you see in terms of lighting? Lap dissolves as we get closer to Xanadu. And Xanadu is actually based off of San Simeon, which is near San Francisco, which was William Randolph Hearst's mansion. And anyone who knows about Citizen Kane knows that Orson Welles hated William Randolph Hearst, and he and John Mankiewicz put this together as a fuck you to Hearst because he created yellow journalism, the National Enquirer, and basically he was the beginning of fake news that started all the way back in 1940. And so Welles, who is very much about the truth, wanted to make a film that mocked him in a way that wasn't so obvious that he could prove it in court, but was obvious enough that if you knew anything about the film, you would get it. And the beginning starts out with an extreme close-up of a no trespassing sign. And we go right over that. That is an example of voyeurism in cinema. Because in real life, if you broke in to Xanadu's property, like, you're gonna get arrested. But because it's film, we get to go wherever we want, wherever the camera will take us. And as we go through lap dissolves of lap dissolves to get closer and closer and closer to this castle on the hill, which reminds you more of like Frankenstein or Dracula than it reminds you of a businessman who made printed newspapers, you get an unsettling feeling that things aren't what they seem. And they're not, especially because, and this is true, William Randolph Hearst built this huge mansion, and he had, because he had so much money, he had art from all over the place. He had, each room was decorated in a different style, Baroque or Renaissance or whatever, and he had giraffes and monkeys, and he had gondolas, and I mean, it was just this insane mansion where all the Hollywood people would go, like Charlie Chaplin at the time, and party and swim in the pool and see all these weird animals. And that's true. So in Citizen Kane, that's how it starts out, is that we see that kind of a castle with the animals and the gondolas, and we get closer and closer and closer. But since it has that no trespassing sign, it's like, wait a second, this is not the height of this building. Like, obviously, a while back, this was the place to go, and now no one's taking care of it, and it's totally dilapidated, everything's falling apart, animals have gotten out of their cages. It's a total disorder. So if we want to think about cinema in the narrative trajectory that we usually get, everything starts out with a social order, then everything gets messed up and disrupted in the social order, and then by the end of the film, social order restored. So if we look at this movie, we see that, in fact, this story starts out with social order already being disrupted. So it's not following the same formula. In fact, the height of his career as a yellow journalist, Orson Welles playing Charles Foster Kane, is like in the middle of the film. And because all of these flashbacks are through people, they talk achronologically. So it's really hard. You have to put together in your own head the chronology of the events, because they're told to us by the person who experienced it, but not in chronological order. So that's another difficulty about the film that you have to pay attention to. We get up to the very castle, and as soon as we get there, all of a sudden, boom, a light goes on in the castle, and it comes on slowly, and we can see just the outline of a prone man. Then the light goes dim. We see Charles Foster Kane prone, but we don't know who he is yet because it's the very beginning of the movie. And then the whole frame is full with snow. And then that snow shrinks down and goes inside and is contained in the snow globe. And in that snow globe, it's snowing because he shook it. But what's interesting is the snow covers the whole frame, covers Charles Foster Kane in bed. It covers everything. And then all of a sudden it shrinks down and is contained in the snow globe. And again, that's the magic of cinema. You cannot get from the no trespassing sign all the way up to Xanadu in 30 seconds. But because of the lap dissolves that are in continuity as you get closer and closer, we buy into it. We're like, oh yeah, we're getting closer and closer. We don't think about how long it would take or anything like that. And then right when we get up to the mansion, a light comes on slowly and fills a upper story window. Because it's hard to, when you don't have any context, it's hard to pick these things out. But it's totally bizarre that the entire screen is filled with snow falling when he's inside. That's impossible. And the snow is really in the snow globe. So there's some kind of weird psychological leap we're supposed to make here, that because he's thinking about the snow globe, the snow enters in and fills the frame, even though he's not supposed to know that he's being filmed, right? Because he's dying, he doesn't know there's a camera in the room, right? So it's the invisible camera. Then all the snow goes back into the snow globe. He drops the snow globe, like listlessly, and it goes down a stair, cracks open, and right at that point, the nurse walks in, and through an ingenious shot, no computers, no nothing, he films through the warped, broken glass, the nurse coming in the door where she looks like she's 2 inches tall because of the distortion. And this is right as we just got an extreme close-up of Orson Welles or Charles Foster Kane's lips with a mustache saying Rosebud. Rosebud. Right? Rosebud, crash, Rosebud, nurse comes in, walks up, covers him up, light goes out. Let's stop there and say, skip the whole film and go to the end. At the end, because he has now become totally isolated from society, it's that thing, would you rather be right or would you like to have friends? Like, if you want to be right all the time, you will end up like Charles Foster Kane, alone in a massive mansion with no one who likes you, right? And that's who he is. He's a total megalomaniac, and he's purposely doing it because he's making fun of William Randolph Hearst. So at the end, but in this scene, there's this series of extreme close-ups that if you put them together, work to create meaning. And so you have snow globe, breaks, snow's contained, close-up, Rosebud, nurse walks into distorted room, comes up and covers him, he's dead. At the very end of the film, after this nameless reporter has talked to many people who knew him, they are starting to burn all of the things that Charles Foster Kane in the film had acquired because he made so much money on this fake news. And his mansion is filled with art and artifacts and things from all over the world, and they're, instead of them being enjoyed and laid out in or a painting that's worth $1 million hung up on the wall, everything's just shoved into piles. It's total chaos, and they're just burning stuff that they don't think is worth anything. And Charles Foster Kane's already dead, so he don't have a say in it. No one, no one's there to say stop. And we see this sled go into this big fire of other stuff too. It's like the pyre, of death or something. And we see the sled. And on the sled, it says Rosebud, written out in script. And we see as the flames slowly climb up and cover Rosebud. Okay? End of that scene. So what people did is they said, okay, he says Rosebud when he dies. Then we see the sled and it says Rosebud on it. So it must mean that what he is thinking is that he has a lost childhood, right? Because when he's about 8 years old or 9 or something like that, he's living in the middle of nowhere in Colorado on the plains where it's just tons of snow. And by pure accident, the land that his parents bought, and they were dirt poor, had oil on it. And so the mother decides that she's going to get the oil out of there and sell it to the bank in the condition that they will take Charles Foster Kane, with them to New York. And he's literally, talk about capitalism, literally raised by a bank instead of by people. And the reason that this is important is there's one line of dialogue.
That's why he's going to be brought up where you can't get at him.
How can you watch that scene and say, oh, he misses his wonderful childhood? The mother just says he's going because she is going to save him from an abusive alcoholic father.
What that kid needs is a good thrashing.
That's why everything was put in her name, because he's an alcoholic and he's a drunk and he beats up his kid. When he's in a good mood, like alcoholics can be, in here he's all fun, hugging him and all this stuff. But we know by the look on the mother's face, this is not typical. And she has the most stern look on her face. She seems almost impenetrable, as if she has no motherly love at all. And yet in that last shot, it's a close-up of her face, and she is, you can tell, profoundly just destroyed by having to give up her son to Mr. Thatcher, who owns a bank, because her husband is a fucking alcoholic who can't keep his hands off Charlie. And that's why she, out of love for Charlie, sends him away from Colorado.
That's why he's going to be brought up where you can't get at him.
Given that point, how can you argue that when he is lying about to die and he drops the snow globe and says Rosebud, that he would in any way, shape, or form be thinking about some wonderful childhood? He didn't have a wonder. He was beaten since the time he was born. His father was a drunk. His mother had no motherly love. They're in the middle of nowhere in Colorado. There's no friends. There's nothing. Why would he long for that? Why would he yearn for that? Why would that sled make any difference? He could buy a million sleds that say Rosebud. So clearly, that's not what it means, because there's no evidence that that is what it means. And here's the other point. How do they know he said Rosebud? Show me in the movie where there is someone in that room when he says Rosebud that can then tell somebody else to tell the reporter. There is no one in that room. He is in there by himself. We, through the camera, see him drop the snow globe and have an extreme close-up, cinematic. Nobody can look at somebody's mouth that close. You'd have to be right here. And we get that Not his whole face. He's not whole. He's fragmented. And all we get is Rosebud. Rosebud. And we're supposed to think that he's thinking about this wonderful childhood? It's ridiculous. So what does it mean? Well, there's a lot of people who have done a lot of research on this, especially talking to Mankiewicz, who wrote the script because he was an alcoholic, and Orson Welles got him up in a cabin and said, write this script about William Randolph Hearst. And again, that's another reason why I think he's not longing for the alcoholic father in Colorado. But what it is since Mankiewicz and Welles hated William Randolph Hearst so much, they decided to put in a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, inside joke into this film. And that is that what is believed to be true is that William Randolph Hearst called his mistress, Marion Davies, which was his real mistress in real life. His first wife was Catholic, and she didn't believe in divorce, so she stayed in New York. They're still married, but he moves to Hollywood, and he has this huge mansion, and he's living with Marion Davies, who is an up-and-coming actress, just like Suzanne Alexander is living with him, and an upcoming singer, and they're both miserable failures. There is a little, like, behind-the-scenes secret story that's not really that secret, and now most people know about it, but I'm going to tell you just in case you don't. There was a rumor that William Randolph Hearst called Marion Davies' clit Rosebud. And that is the inside joke that Mankiewicz is playing, not on Hearst, not on Welles, but on the audience. Because, like in a Hitchcock film, where there's a MacGuffin, where there's something where everyone's looking for, but by the end of the film, it doesn't have any meaning anymore. It's the same thing here. Mankiewicz sets up the MacGuffin, Rosebud. He gives us the SLED to make us believe it. And then we say, oh, it must be that, without giving it one more thought, without thinking for 1 second about why in the hell would he want to go back to Colorado. There's not one thing about his personality. I mean, he wants to be rich. That's what he wants. He wants to run the newspaper. It makes absolutely no sense that he would want to go back to Colorado, or this is some long-lost childhood thing that he's thinking about before he dies. And in fact, Mankiewicz is saying, ha ha, audience, I made you believe that that Rosebud was the SLED because that's a trope of cinema, and you just followed along in a formulaic way without using your brain and thinking critically, because anybody who thinks critically about this film cannot support the idea that Rosebud is the SLED. It doesn't work. However, it being Marion Davies' clit totally works. It's a great underhanded joke, and we know William Randolph Hearst was livid and tried to not only shut down every single copy of Citizen Kane, but he banned it from all the theaters he owned. Barely, it wasn't nominated for anything because nobody could see it. And Orson Welles finally opened a tent and showed the movie himself. There was one copy of the movie, and there are some also little spatterings of rumor that the mob might have been involved, and that the mob had the one copy of the film that William Randolph Hearst couldn't get because it was with the mob, and that Orson Welles had them keep it in safety, because if not, if it was just at somebody's theater or something like that, it would have been destroyed. And it wasn't destroyed, and Welles made sure it wasn't destroyed, and now it's considered, after 75 years, one of the best movies ever made. And it's not because of Rosebud, it's because of everything else except for Rosebud that makes this film genius in every single way. Thanks for watching Frame by Frame with Janet. See you next time.